Hi, thanks for joining us on this Wednesday, May 4th. And for those of you in the know, that's Star Wars Day, as in May the 4th be with you, like May the Force be with you, to spell it out very plainly. Not everybody's an English speaker here natively. And we're going to talk about i18n bugs. I have with me Olivier Libouban. He manages our product development. He's very much the brainchild of a lot of our product development as well. It's a real exciting process. We're going to be going through it next week, actually, on some longer range goals this year. And we get into the room and we have all this stuff graded and all that as far as features go and visions. And maybe, just maybe, the localization people who are on this call can get into those conversations. And I hope that you are. So, one of the things that brought about this webinar is that we get called as a company into a lot of situations where bugs, i18n bugs, and not all of those are i18n, some of them are localization bugs, but they sit in some very global companies. These bugs sit in the bug tracking Jira database. It might be Jira, it might be something else, for sometimes years. And so it struck a chord with me that we should really talk about this a little bit, and what it means, and what sort of bugs are there, and all that. But also, how do you get your organization to move? How do you work in lockstep with your organization so that doesn't continue to happen? And there was this quote that my niece said recently. She said, "Paper is where information goes to die." And I thought, oh, that's very true. Outside of the tech industry, a lot of stuff still happens on paper. And I thought, wow, Jira is where i18n bugs go to die, just because they just sit there. Nobody wants to take them on. And so I thought we'd talk about why that is. I think it's a very sensitive situation and all that. So with that, we're going to show you some stuff later in the webinar. I'm going to give you some background, and we'll go from there. First of all, everything on this slide, if you're a globalization person, you know this, right? But I wanted to put this down in words because lots of people ask for the presentation. We make the presentation downloadable afterwards. By the way, just want to make sure everybody knows, I'll probably have to repeat this, there is a recording being made. We will distribute the recording. But everyone here knows this, but it's good to see it in print so that you can use these statements within your organization. First of all, globalization is one of the great ways to organically grow revenue. I read that recently, that quote, and I wrote it down, and I forgot to write what article I saw it in and everything. It was like an HBR article, Harvard Business Review or something. But basically the point is, as CEO, CEOs go around and they think, oh, I'm going to acquire a company, I'm going to do this. And these are the ways to not organically grow your revenue, but globalization is one of the great ways that you can do that without having to buy something. But of course, you have to buy the effort. It takes effort, and it's really important. And you can use that quote to go back to your teams that maybe are a little stiff and hard to move and hard to implicate why this is so important and why they have to sort of think empathetically like a user from another locale. And it's important to think that that localization is a user experience. And even though, because you're going to get hit with this, obviously, somebody in that other locale maybe speaks English, they don't all speak English, and for a good deal of them, even if they speak English, they're still interpreting in their head after they're into their native language. That's tiring, and it's not terribly empathetic. And people talk about UX being empathetic to the demands of the user. So really, that localization is a user experience, And remember that UX design team rightly agonizes over things like the color blue, which is, you know, sort of like, I get it. That's really important. The harmonious view of your interface is important, but so is the fact that you blew the name of the person using it because it uses a special character. I'll give an example of that in a few minutes. Don't treat your global users like second-class concerns. That should be obvious, but use that, bring that forward in your organizations. You all know this if you're attending this webinar. But have systems and processes that integrate with product development. And that last one really holds back a lot of globalization organizations. I can't tell you how many people are still shuffling things around with spreadsheets. It still really happens. And perhaps you're having a battle to do that. But man, you know, some really large globalization companies are still, if not in spreadsheets, still manually emailing files or manually pushing files around. You know, they might even have a Git connector, but they're manually opening that Git connector and grabbing a file and moving it over like you might do in some common drive. It's just crazy to me, but it's still what is going on. All right, so as an i18n, you know, concern, what I hear when I ask questions, and you know, I got a lot of feedback on this, is that i18n is really misunderstood. I can't get the developers' attention. So it's important, we're gonna review that a little bit. Sometimes the i18n issue, like they won't, you know, a team won't even call it a bug. They'll call it an issue to sort of downgrade how important it is, right? So we'll talk a little bit about what does that entail. Can developers experience it in your organization? Remember, one of the principles of agile development is you got to be able to demonstrate an issue. You got to be able to see it to prove that you've done something, but you also really, like it's human nature, in order to fix a bug, you have to experience it. And if all they're seeing is a screenshot, well, now they don't know where it is. Hey, I'm on to my next feature. I'm not going to go back to do that. I can't go on a sleuthing thing, how important it is. You get into this whole argument. So if developers cannot experience the situation, you are naturally, organizationally at a disadvantage. Remember that i18n or even localization bug, it doesn't exist in the TMS. By all means, I'm not against your TMS, but know that the TMS is not your answer to bridging the gaps between software development, and I'm speaking specific to software, and your localization issues, your localization goals. So a lot of times, like, you know, when I explain what we do here at Lingoport, people say, well, is it a TMS? It's like, no, it's not a TMS. There's a lot of TMSs out there. We interface with TMSs, but the problems around development don't actually exist in the TMS, and you should not expect them to. The TMS is there to centralize and organize your translation efforts. It's not really there to centralize and organize your product development around localization. Now, every significant application, every one of them, has data input, it manages the data, it transforms it, it compares it to something, and returns that data. It's really useful to think that way rather than, hey, I'm just displaying something on the screen, which is sort of like a naive approach to globalization. Like, it's not just about embedded strings. You have to teach people to think about locale, not just, hey, do we support Spanish? Locale involves all kinds of different formatting. The formatting is going to be different from, say, Mexico to Spain. Phone numbers, dates, times, all kinds of things are involved. And some internationalization issues aren't going to really show up in a classic sort of testing environment because they're business logic related. So you have to be thinking really broadly in terms of a product development team and getting those product managers on board. And you would think, in my experience, you would think product managers would be great allies, but often they just don't understand the situations. So, warning signs in your organization that's going to keep those bugs sitting in and ignored, okay, sitting in your bug tracking system, all right? First of all, questions I hear all the time: aren't we already internationalized? Hey, we support Unicode. Aren't we internationalized? No, it's not like that. It's like saying, hey, we support security, so we're going to stop worrying about security. I bring up security a lot because it's like it's a slam dunk. Organizations know their applications have to be secured, right? Well, organizations should know that globalization doesn't stop. Internationalization doesn't stop. You just developed a new feature. Your need to internationalize doesn't stop. And the complication, which I sort of indicate on the last bullet here, it makes it so it's less obvious than, hey, did you embed a string, right? Again, it's hard to get developers' attention if they can't see, if they can't see what you're talking about naturally. If they just see a screenshot, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to go on a wild goose chase to look for this thing. And it's complicated. Some of those issues are actually related to localization, like your localization files. And some of those issues are in the bulk of the source code in how, say, plurals might be handled logically. Built, word order is logically built into how they do the coding. I'll particularly mention, forms of JSON or YAML, and they come in a lot of forms. They're supported by a lot of different programming languages. There's a lot of different variants to JavaScript. They all have their variations, and people can get creative in terms of those file formats. They're not wrong, but you need to be thinking in terms of how am I sort of translating, use that word again, those file formats, or transforming them into stuff that I can use and are a stable workflow situation. And when you're moving files around manually, you're turning various people, whether it's a localization engineer or a developer who is on the development team, you're turning them into file clerks. Remember, the Italian might come back before the Spanish or the German or some form of Chinese or Japanese. You don't really want to have people thinking about that. You want it to be really automatic, because that's what the kind of integration people are used to. And again, you know this, but I'm going to repeat, frequency matters in your message, right? Let people roll their eyes. Oh, there's, Barbara or Joe coming again. They're going to talk to me about localization. Let them roll their eyes. It's okay. Frequency matters in your message, because organizational resistance is the nature of things. It's just how it works. People don't really want to change. Even if they believe in the message, they want to keep doing things the way they do, because anytime you have to take time out to improve a process, the first time around, that takes longer than just getting it done. It's just how it is, right? So the other thing is that the developer community, speaking in a stereotype, they're pretty smart. They like to develop their own things, and often it is a real Achilles heel that they think, oh, I'm going to invent my own way. I don't want anything else. I know better. I know my code. I don't want anything else to interfere with my process. So I'm going to invent my own way. I see this the most in Silicon Valley-based businesses. I know I'll get my hand slapped for that. yeah, you're really smart. You have a lot of scale. You got here. There's no need to reinvent your own way to handle locale or handle strings or put everything in one single central repository for the whole organization. I've seen that many times. Companies with lots of products suddenly trying to put everything in one, every string in one repository, even though like they've got one product that has 600 repos. It's like, to me, that's like unnecessarily complex. So anyway, the go away, we're too busy message is going to have it happen a lot. Get used to it. Keep pushing through. All right. So I was rather amused. One of our emails that went out to people that already registered for the webinar last week was, hey, you know, if you have anything particular you want to talk to me about, write back. And I told you I got some good feedback, and most of it was like, how do I get the attention of the developers, right? But this is one case where I could actually show an example of how some internationalization issues are going to be seemingly out of your control, right? So the email went out. Pam wrote it from marketing. The return address was like info@lingoport.com. But anyway, we got this sort of snarky response, which I really got a kick out of. You could always tease me, by the way. Let me share an i18n secret with you. You currently display my name or any other names with or words with diacritics. You need to use proper encoding, probably UTF-8. Duh, it happened to us. We broke his name. How's that for a user experience? Now, what happened is we go from our CRM to our email app, and somewhere there, the character encoding got broken, right? And of course, we didn't see all that. So sort of like, gosh, you know, we didn't see that out. But that is literally what we are doing to our global users. We are sending this. Instead of Pavel, we got, I don't know how do you pronounce a question mark? But that was this last letter in his name getting destroyed. So there's even a Wikipedia entry that I encourage you to use and circulate. It basically is, the term is mojibaki, it's Japanese for ghost characters, but and you can go there and you can see a whole entry on broken characters and lots of examples. I just, you know, basically put up that one in the image. So there you go. So man, you're messing somebody else's name. I don't know how. It's like sort of like the worst thing you can do, you know. So there it is, and we did it. So we're supposed to be all conscious of that. So it creeps in. It happens. Don't expect it to ever totally go away. This is another example of an interesting bug that I picked off from somebody else they sent me. The likely cause of this is that somebody was manually filling in a table and they couldn't tell the difference between Bulgarian and Greek. And so what you had is both languages being mixed on an interface on data input. And this is the kind of thing that your developers might not be able to see, but it breaks down when you have humans versus machines. If you had a machine doing this automatically, yeah, it takes time to set that up. But man, when you have it set up, you're going to save yourself a lot of aggravation. So don't do that. Don't have people manually processing translations. You're going to mess up eventually, and you're going to have this fire drill. Let me give you another example. You get the translated file back. Somebody needs to edit something on the format. They open the file, they do their little edit, you know, maybe they move a curly bracket or something, and they save it, and inadvertently they save it as ASCII. And then they push it into the database, and now you've got a problem because you've got to figure out, well, I just corrupted a bunch of characters in my database. How do I discombobulate that? So these are the kinds of things that when you have humans versus machines, you open yourself up to naturally. So you have these fire drills like, how am I going to fix that? And often you don't find out the error until months later. So it's extremely costly in terms of aggravation. Other examples like duplicate keys, I have seen that. I have seen large global organizations fight over, like, is that a bug or not? Because the application maybe worked, just you risked that the wrong word was going to come out. Well, that stuff needs to be detected and pointed to automatically, so nobody has to figure that out, right? Broken file formats, again, not necessarily technically an internationalization issue, but it affects localization, and it's going to get in the lap of your localization team. So might as well automate that and figure it. No locale passed. We had a situation with a customer that's in the medical device business where they actually really, they caused a lot of damage because in the bug of this system, the user, in that case, a nurse, was able to fall out of the locale preference, and suddenly the units of measurement were different, and the wrong dosage of something was applied because they were measured differently in different locales in Europe versus the United States. So the wrong locale can have really disastrous effects. I mean, that's, people say, well, i18n doesn't kill anybody. Well, in that case, I happen to know that it actually did. The other thing is that if you have a poor translation, let's say your sales office in Japan is saying, hey, I don't like this translation, it's actually onerous to fix in many cases, because that location of where that string is not uniquely obvious. So we'll demonstrate some ways to make that go away. All right, so I'm talking too much, and I want to leave time for Olivier. The feedback for your developers should be integrated into their process. And this is a big leap for a lot of localization teams, right? Developers are used to everything being integrated. And we talk about continuous localization. That was a new term a few years ago. It wasn't new to developers. They've been continuously integrating things since the 90s, and maybe even a little bit before, for things like memory management and the like. But developers are very used to that. So it's funny, when we show our systems to developer groups, they always nod their heads, and they say things like, I want that, because they're used to that. They're used to being hinted within certain quality gates when they've made an internationalization issue and how to fix it. They're also used to localization processes or something like that being automatic. It's why you might hear from some of your developers, can't we just pipe it out to Google Translate? And you bristle and all that, because you know without the right systems that actually creates more work for you. So developers want things integrated, and we'll have examples of that, so I'm not going to go into that too deeply. But notice the red hours. It shows, here's your problem, fix it. It's not like, oh, there's a problem here, and I'm going to send you a screenshot. So easy to digest information. Your code, you have certain gates, like during development in the IDE, you have code review. This happens all the time, and you have QA. And the further up you are in that progression, the easier it is and faster it is to fix. I would say the first two, development or code review, those are pretty good, right? If you're QA, yeah, that's good, but it's better if you're further up, because you have less cycles of looping, right? The other thing that is just a truism that a lot of localization teams aren't used to is that there's a whole lot of branching going on. There's adaptation of microservices architecture. This adds complexity for developers. It's hard to know, where am I grabbing my files from? You need automation there. It really makes it happen. And again, in red, visible. Easy to onboard. If localization is hard to onboard, it tends to lag. If it's easy to onboard and it moves with every branch and every Microsoft service that's set up, well, then it's easy. That's the continuous system, right? So we have 3 products around that. They fit into different areas of different buckets of the process, but they actually are all fairly continuous in their application. So you have Globalizer, that's scanning for internationalization in the development. The idea is you fix the i18n issues before they become bugs. We have Localizer. That is saying, hey, are there any new words that need to be translated? Those can be pushed out and managed, and there's like 41 or some odd checks on the file that happen automatically. They dynamically manage whether somebody is branching out or using microservices architecture. It all is automated, so it's a no-touch system. You can send either an increment or a full file of translations. It's up to you. You can do all kinds of transforms, and this is going to scare people, but you can even send to machine translation, which is we make easy to clean up afterwards, so that developers can actually see what does this look like in these other languages, right? Also, we automatically pseudo-localize. So anytime there's a change, testers can test in, without necessarily having to speak a target language. Lastly is Localizer QA, and this is a gee-whiz product. It is very, very cool. It meets something that previously was felt not to be possible, and that lets you actually have somebody perform a linguistic review and make or suggest changes, and those changes, once approved, are fully automated and pushed back to the repository. So now when your Japanese team says, hey, I don't like your translation, they can actually go and they can say, I'm going to suggest something different. And they suggest that, and your localization manager or your translator, back home says, yeah, I agree with that, or no, I don't agree with that. They approve it, and it gets pushed all the way back to the source code. No developers are involved. We can do that, unlike anybody else, because we're actually in your source code. Our products live at the software repository level, not just at the file level as a TMS. So we can push everything back. It's really a unique position. When we first launched this, it was only working for web apps. Now it's like everything, mobile, web, even a game console, it'll all work. So some basics. And by the way, if you want a lot of detail, just go to the Lingoport blog, and in the search window, type in gremlins, and you'll get a lot of that. You can see we have these little gremlins here that we use even in our product for them. Some very simple ones. Locale, that is the top one. Do you have a good locale framework? Without a good locale framework, you're never going to be able to internationalize well. So your framework is going to be determined somewhat by your requirements, what programming languages you're going to use. You're going to have more than one locale framework based on your different programming languages. Those need to be built into the architecture of your software. It's a very high level, right? You have the normal things that you're used to, like your strings, your concatenations, and more. Remember, concatenations are actually how developers are taught to write code. They're taught to, put their variables within their strings. That's like computer programming 101, but it doesn't work for globalization. So how that gets handled is really important. That's an important thing to catch. There are going to be methods, functions, classes that are going to be different for every different programming language, and those issues are going to get in the way of, say, rendering a date time correctly. There are going to be things called general patterns. That's a very loose bug bucket, but it might be like, hey, I'm going to assign a font to a page. And that's dangerous because that font may not render a certain language correctly. It might just put things too close together or something like that. There are static files like a user agreement, a video, things like that that can be embedded. There are third-party products that maybe you connect to that maybe don't do what you think. That's that mailer problem where we broke the encoding somewhere in the path. So you've got to watch out for those. All right, so an example of these methods, functions, and classes, we cover these issues. And you see this image, I literally cut and pasted that from the configuration server for Globalizer. You know, these are the issues. And by the way, if you clicked on any one of these in the actual application, you get this like spread of all these issues, and you can really zero in on some of these. Sometimes you, like if you're dealing with an application where you know you have certain bugs, you can say, I'm just going to look at collation because that's all I care about right now. That's one way to zero in on things. So it's a nice way to do it. But you know, if you're attending these, you probably know what all these are. But they come in different forms. And again, ask your teams, when are we finding internationalization? After feature testing, you know, some teams are using pseudo-localization, but often that's happening really late. And you're only able to show the result of that, not where that issue is. Even worse, a lot of times those issues are being found after localization. That's even a bigger pain point because remember, the developers have probably moved on to something else. So better than never, you know, testing, you know, I'm not advocating you don't test. You know, certainly we test everything also. It's better than never to find it in testing, but know that when you're relying on that, you're creating backlog, and backlog gets ignored. So during development, you can find it within the IDE, pull requests, code review, see the issues close to creation, fast and easy to fix. You can look at it from a repo status, from a visibility via dashboards, all that kind of stuff. And the other part is make sure your localization process doesn't create further bugs with your automation. So your automated checks with issues and locations issued for you should be able to pinpoint everything. And your pseudo localization should always be on. So you're not waiting till later to run that. Your developers can actually see it as they go. All right, I've talked way too long. I'm going to turn it over to Olivier. As I do that, remember that when you have questions, nobody's done this yet, but there's a Q&A interface in GoToWebinar. Use it and start typing up, and we'll address those. Go ahead, Olivier.
Hi, this is Olivier. I'm going to talk about some basic things here. Adam, which screen do you see right now?
I see yours. You're good.
Do you see Localizer QA or not?
I do.
Okay, and you don't see the other part?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to start. So I just wanted to say hello. I'm Olivier. I drive product development here at Lingoport, and I'm going to talk about 3 things that Adam outlined here. The first one is how to use Globalizer. And Globalizer is a system that has a number of components. We're going to show a few of the deployments of those components, but there are more than that. Then we're going to talk about Localizer very briefly and also Localizer QA. So that said, I'm going to stop sharing my my mug here and go directly to the demo. The first thing that developers do is they write code in an IDE, meaning an integrated development environment. And that's where you are writing your new features. You have a sprint maybe, or you have a waterfall model, it doesn't really matter. You're gonna write code at some point after the design been made. And so what you want is, as you are writing code, for the files that you're interested in, you want to check for i18n correctness, internationalization correctness. The easiest way to do that is to add to your IDE an external tool that will be using the core part of Globalizer, which is the scanner. And that scanner will interact with the ID to say, for the file that you are selecting or the directories that you're selecting, let me show you the i18n issues that we're detecting. To do that, you just click a button like this, which will be very similar to the same thing as for the folks, and it will go retrieve a set of rules that is how to scan the code, and it will scan the code. And it will tell you you have embedded strings at line 101, you have some others at line 121, for example. Here's an embedded string in the code. So you have i18n issues here. Here is a datetime instance issue. As you're not passing a locale to a datetime, it's always going to be in a format that's kind of an English format. So right here at your fingertips, you will have, as you're developing code, as early as possible, pretty much, the detection of potential issues. If this issue is something that you think it's not an internationalization issue, for whatever reason, you can add this little non-NLSL, which is a standard here, save it, and I'm going to just do that and rerun the scanning. And when I rerun the scanning, it will now ignore this. It will say, oh, my engineer has decided that this is not actually user-facing, most likely, and so it's not part of my issues. So one of the things is that something that you're interested in or not? I'm going to undo this and save it again. If I were to do that, of course, that internationalization issue is going to appear again. The typical thing here is that you will want to refactor the code. So here it is, line 227, it's this one right here. There's an issue. I'm going to refactor the code, and not to bore everybody to death, I'm just going to do it this way, meaning I'm now passing a locale to this right here. And so if I rerun the scanner, this time it will not be an issue, but it's not because I've decided to ignore it. It's because I've refactored the code, so it's actually a good way to display a time instance. There it is. So that's the very first thing, is as soon as you write code, you get a warning that things are there. And when Adam was talking about something visible, that's the visibility as early as you can get it, pretty much. The second type of visibility is when you push files back to a repository. Here it's in GitHub. You want to also maybe have another check that happens. So it's a little bit later. It's just after developers have written their code and they are pushing it to a repo where all the developers are contributing, if you want. At that point, you see that 22 hours ago, I did a commit here. That's me, Olivier Libouban at Lingoport.com, and I updated projections view model. So let me show you the update. It's a great update. It's a update that says set title to mapping projection. It's a mapping model here. Wouldn't it be cool to know if there is an issue here just because it's been pushed to GitHub? Well, it is, and there it is. You have an analysis summary of the code that was changed, and it's telling me that at line 49, the issue is an embedded string, and it's mapping projection. And if I were to click here, by the way, it would tell me exactly where in the line of code that is located. And so the conversations that tend to happen on GitHub are things like, do you want to do it this way? I would rather that you use that library, and so on. Here you have directly, automatically, the indication of the code that was modified and pushed to the repo as to what could be an issue. And in this instance, it's an embedded string, and it's obviously an embedded string, as you can tell from here. So a second deployment is very, very close to as soon as you can get it. It's as soon as you push it. And finally, just to show in terms of a demo here, you may also want to have a view this time, not of the files that have been modified, but overall for your project. And so every night, maybe you're going to get a repository scanning for the entire code of your repository based on how you want that code to be analyzed. And here you see that if I go there, I will have concatenation, embedded strings, locale sensitive method, general pattern, and static file references that are indicated in terms of a number of issues. They've been analyzed with an HTML and JavaScript type of scanning model, if you want. And for each one of them, I can click here and it will go down to the line of code where the issues may reside. So for example, here, do I have an issue? Do I have an issue there? Which is, by the way, this is the very typical way of having concatenations where you have a string fragment followed by a variable followed by another string fragment. That's like the most typical way that you can get a concatenation. And as a developer in the US, you'll feel that this is very natural to do. But if you think i18n, you'll know right away that this is wrong. And in order to detect those location in the code, and you see it's in this directory, in this file at line 242, this is the exact location of a concatenation, and it's obviously concatenation. So the nice thing about this is not only at the time of development, also the time of pushing to the repo, but also overall, whenever you feel like it, typically on a nightly basis, you will have a summary of all the issues that may reside in the code that you're creating now. So that's it for the part around Globalizer, and there are other ways to deploy Globalizer, but I just wanted to show you the main aspects given visibility, ease of use. As you can tell, when I pushed that over here, that push in the repo, I didn't have as a developer to do anything special. I just did as I would any push to the repo that I would, and it told me I have an issue right there. And on this side, this is an automatic scan. So as a developer, again, I don't have to do anything. It just tells me where things are. By the way, typically this dashboard here is used by management in order to decide how to drive developers towards resolution of those. It's not, you don't want to resolve them from here. You want to help developers focus their attention on maybe purely embedded strings to start with, or maybe you have a big problem with date format or something, or currencies. And so maybe that's where you want to start first and then go on a different sprint to address other issues. And those issues would be best addressed from the ID. So those were the globalizer side of things. I'm not going to go to the localizer side of things. And the first thing I wanted to show is the fact that for Luck World 44, I developed a set of non-standard file formats that are used by developers. And I gathered those from different clients that we've interacted with. They are not named, of course, but those are real files. And as being non-standard, the issue is that they will not be, in order to understand their content, in order to understand if there's a duplicate key, if the encoding is right, if the format is correct, you need to have something special every time for them. If you want to send them to a TMS will not be able to parse those files. So instead, what we do is for non-standard file formats, we have a transform framework where we write custom transforms that will be integrated in the overall framework for localizer, so that the files that will be analyzed will be standard files derived from the non-standard files, and the files that will be sent back and forth to the TMS will be standard files that a TMS can address. And when they will be returned in the format that developers are expecting. In other words, a non-standard format. I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. You can go there, by the way, that's on Lingoport public at Luck World 44. This is an example of something called evtypes.txt. And if I click here, you're going to see the type of things that are being returned here. It's not really standard. It's a real thing, by the way. This file was a real file from one of our customers. And this is, of course, anonymized, and it's not anything special. So instead of the non-format text file, like a text like Arabic and so on, that has that form, you want to have a standard format that will look like a key, a value in a properties file. Properties are super simple for all TMSs. And so at that point, instead of analyzing this, the system will analyze and send those type of files to the TMS. So let me show you something here, which is a PHP file, which was used to hold key value pairs to be translated. So PHP is really for coding. It's not for data. So right away, the ending PHP is wrong. That's pretty much it. This should be, if you wanted, you have a data format, it would be JSON property, resx, XML, some other things, but not PHP. And here you have some programming that looks very much like something that is a key value pair, but it's not actually. And so what you want to do is to transform that into something that will be understandable by a TMS, and also where we can analyze it with all the checks that we have back and forth. Just to show you what this looks like on the dashboard now, on the localizer side of the dashboard. This is just for German that I've for the demo here. And so you can see that the files that were PHP files, they are actually transformed into properties files. And here it says that for German, it's 91% complete. There are 34 keys. It's really a demo here. 451 resource words. And so right now there is in that one file, which is this file right here, properties, which is transformed from a PHP file. There are 3 strings to be translated and 15 words to be translated. So this will actually, if I were to send this to be translated, a properties file will be sent to a TMS that is onboarded with this project. It will be returned as a TMS in German from the TMS as a properties in German. It will be transformed back to a PHP in German in the way that the developers expect. I hope that was clear, because that happens very often, especially in large companies where different teams have don't have a standard way of doing localization, of doing i18n. They are creating their own way, not knowing what exists already for a programming language. That tends to happen quite a bit. And so we adapt to their constraints and we make things happen automatically for everybody here. That was around the transform. I'm just going to show you briefly things that this is a demo application that we use for most of our demos. And Adam was talking about pseudo localization. And so this is in English, and every time a string is created in English, something will, a process will run to show it in Esperanto, which is the locale that we use for pseudo localization. And so what you can see is there's a start character, there's an end character, there are different set characters that are appearing here. This is Korean, this is Japanese, and so on. And those are accented, so it's really easy to figure out that those, first of all, those strings have been externalized in English into a resource file that can be pseudo-localized. So there will be the corresponding strings in a resource file for Esperanto. And the layout is okay, meaning you can see the first and the last characters. It's not truncated. You can see that if it's really long, it will be laid out this way, not on one line. And you can navigate the application that way. I can hear the clicks on your end, by the way, Adam. So this is pseudo localization that we wanted to talk about. And one thing that Adam mentioned was machine translation. So what I'm going to do is for the same application here, I'm going to go back to English here. And you can tell it's being translated in a few things. Oh, here is English. And the code for this application is located in Lingoport Public Rebel Outfitters. It's in the trials branch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the ENUS side of the world. And I'm going to say, I'm going to edit this file as a developer would. And let's say that it was not hypersurgeon that you wanted, it was a neurosurgeon or something. So this guy was a neurosurgeon, not a hypersurgeon. And maybe some other things, but pretty much that's all you want to do. You finalize that. And if you have machine translation onboarded with this, then you'll have the strings right away. If you have a typical TMS, you can also send the files at your own frequency if you want, and have the TMS do the regular work and then return it back to the repo. It will be all automated. I just want to show you what could happen if you had machine translation. So I'm going to go back here, and the first thing is you see that pseudo translation was done within seconds. So I'm going to go to pseudo localization here, and you see that hypersurgeon, which was the previous one, is already ready for a QA kind of phase, if you want, around pseudo localization with neurosurgeon, meaning that string was externalized properly and was pseudo localized properly. The second thing that will happen is that you see that those guys, Spanish, blah, 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 French, which is a language that I understand a little bit, it's back already. And so for developers, it might be really useful to have this. And so in French, you're going to see the translation. And it's not just French, by the way, it's German, Spanish in that particular commit. The French is right here. Neurochirurgien, that's the right French, by the way. I translated from English, so that's all good. At that point, depending on how applications are deployed, customers' applications, it may be that this is already back here. So if I look at the droids here, I had hypersurgeon, maybe I can reload this. And in English, it's now neurosurgeon, meaning it was deployed already with English. Well, it could have been deployed also with French, maybe. And so neurochirurgien has already been deployed with the French. So you can see how fast you could have a system whereby you create or you modify or you change the source locale, and right away you get at least a sense, maybe it's not the final sense, for what's happening in terms of the translation. The final thing that I wanted to check a little bit about is localizer QA. So let's say that things have been translated, maybe from a TMS or maybe from machine translation, and you want to have somebody in Japan maybe, or in France, in Paris, on a terrace with a nice cigarette and whatever the typical stereotypes are here for French people. I'm going to be Frank, and Frank is a planetary linguist. That's a maybe an LSP, or maybe it's the planetary linguist part of the Rebel Outfitters company. I'm going to log in, and here I have some tasks that have been assigned to me, and the tasks are to check Rebel Outfitters for Sprint 2 in French. So I'm going to go and check that task, navigate here, which is this guy right there, and check some things. And let's say that in French, I don't like the fact that this didn't have an uppercase, for example. So I'm going to take this one, and for whatever reason, I want an uppercase for this. So the current is this one. The new is the same, but with an uppercase. And I need an ID. So that's really important for localizer QA. One of the locales we provide is not just Esperanto, but another locale that is used for linguistic review. And that other locale, by the way, in this instance is interlingual. You can pick and choose your different locales. So this one was the original English to be translated into neurochirurgien French. And so that's the localizer ID that I want to make sure is there. I could type it, I could cut and paste it. I could have a comment here if it goes back to a TMS. I'm just going to give you a very brief view of what happens here. I can build a list of corrections for French, for that, for Rebel Outfitters. And at some point, I'm happy with my correction. I'm going to submit them. And when I submit them, they will be sent to the system on the back end. I can go to the post edit, by the way, that I've done, meaning the corrections that I've done. And you see that this one is being, it's waiting on the return for that change, going from neurochirurgien to neurochirurgien with an uppercase N. And because here it's with machine translation, it's going to be really fast, but typically this suggestion would be sent to a TMS where the official translators will say, I accept, or I reject it, I do something different, or I return the file, and it will be back in the repo automatically. So I'm going to update here, resend. It's ready, it's completed, it was done. If you have access to the repo, you can click on this link, and it will take you directly to the change that was made in that file, in this repo, in the right branch, in the right location. Everything is correct. And so you see that the lowercase n has been modified to uppercase n. that's how fast it can be. Typically, it will not be that fast. This is great for a demo, but typically it will go to a TMS with a set of other tasks that the translator has to do, and it will be returned. And at that point, maybe the deployment has happened. And so if I go back to the French one here, it's now with an uppercase. That's it for the demos. Back to you, Adam.
All right, thank you, Olivier. I'm gonna go back to presenting. Show my screen. Okay, so right away I had a question on pseudo-localization. I think you saw the answer there. Are pseudo-localization files committed back to the repo upon commit, or would they live in the globalizer dashboard? No, the truth is in the repository. We like to push things to the repository because of that. Remember that. That no matter what you do, whether it's in a TMS or anything like that, the truth is always in the repo. If you're going to have something persistent that you're going to use as a development process or as a deployment, it's got to be in the repo. That's where you verify. You know, Olivier had that very good example. This picture on this screen is actually taken from a production application using localizer. And you can see I switched to the right locale, and I could see the pseudo localizations right there. So as a developer, I could see it. But those pseudo localizations were not in a dashboard somewhere. They were not in a TMS somewhere. They were in the application. You know, Olivier mentioned MT. You can curate that MT. Edits in localizer QA can go back to your MT or your TMS so that your MT gets smarter. You know, it's an interesting thing. It's a different way to look at localization, certainly. But I actually think that's the future, that will move some of the human interaction to the QA portion rather than just dealing with source and target files. The reason is that you have so many small incremental changes. I mean, remember, we still do have localization companies dealing with minimum charges and the like, which holds back localization. So people will aggregate their localization so that they don't, you know, incur too many minimum charges, right? But if you're using MT and you can take it through another cycle later on, there's really no risk to always being localized. And I think that that's going to be, you know, ask me again in 5 years, but I think that's the direction. I think our product line is right on that. It takes a little while. Remember that first screen where they're like, we're too busy, we don't want to change anything. It takes a while for that to be accepted. Certainly people are afraid of MT, that it's going to create some error that is, you know, sort of ludicrous. And that's why the editing afterwards in the QA is important. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. But look at what Salvo Gamarisi wrote about at Airbnb, a whole sort of curated MT in that case. Essentially, this is doing the same thing. You're able to leverage your existing translations into memories and start to have things be a lot more automatic and truly continuous. So that's, you know, I'm not saying you have to do that. Our products support both human and MT iterations, but I do think that that should be of interest to everyone here. All right. Lastly, again, the message is on repeat. Where is the issue in the code? Make it fast and easy to fix. If a plumber knows there's a leak somewhere, they go to where the water is. If you know there's an i18n issue, you go to where the issue is if you're showing it. For localization, you want those automatic checks, those transforms Olivier really nicely demonstrated. You want the localization routing being automatic. You want file synchronization. We didn't really talk about that too much, but you know, if you've got a dynamic system, often with many, many repos, let's say 100 repos, and you have to synchronize manually what goes back, what came out, what's the latest instance. Remember, if you're talking about human translation, it could be that the human translation is coming back after there's been further changes. If you have to manually manage that, it's no fun for anybody, and it's going to be error prone. So you get the point, and then furthermore, you can take advantage of in-country input right away, rather than having this backlog of translation updates. All right, celebrate your wins. Some of the best globalization organizations really celebrate that global point. So remember, you're highlighting how important that is. Develop your own globalization heroes in your organizations. This is one of the ways you get things across. Remember, by nature, developers are an expert-oriented organization. That means they really respect expertise. So if you hold people up as people that really do globalization well, or helped you with something, or whatever, that is recognizable. That is a good thing in a development organization. Build your culture. Repeat. I mean, you guys know all this, but I can tell you that a lot of people don't feel empowered to do this. You've got to create your own power to do it. All right, questions. These are some questions that I had previous. Remember, there is the Q&A interface. We're a little over our time. I will stay on to answer all questions. All right, so again, I want to thank you for joining us. If you're having to sign off to go to another meeting, and encourage you to stay. Most of you are still here. All right, so some questions that came in. What are the best practices for i18n coding compliance? What I would say is that there's a lot of documents on this for best practices. There's a lot on the Lingoport blog. There is even training and all that, but the idea is don't concatenate, don't embed strings, pass locale, have a mature locale that it assigns for other formats. Don't just think of language. Think of the user, be empathetic to the user in these other countries. Make it visible. Let people see what it's going to look like if I'm German, And the second sentence, I'm literally transforming what they wrote. Because we may find that although there are i18n guidelines for the engineering team, they may ignore them. Again, frequency and visibility matter. If you made it really simple to say, here's the issue, go fix it, it's a little harder to ignore. If you make champions visible, it's a little harder to ignore. Next question was, is machine translation creating new issues? Well, it depends on how you're using it. Did you make it easy to correct? Chances are no, because we actually have a patent on our system. It's not easy to do that. So we've made that fairly easy to do that. I would say if you're using MT and you don't have an easy way to correct that MT, then yes, you are creating new issues. That is the case. But I'm certainly really up on MT. I think it's, we have to stop thinking of, I put myself in the position of a translator. You probably got like at least 1 degree in linguistics, and you're this highly educated person, and you're told, hey, here's 33 words, translate them, I'm going to pay you by the word. I mean, it's like sort of insane that is actually a business practice, but it is what's going on, and it feels pretty unrewarding. So I actually see that that's not necessarily sustainable, and moving the translator into the team as a QA asset is much more powerful for that translator, and much more powerful for the company that is buying those translations. All right, I believe we have a specific challenges with old parts and many layers on top of it. That is a common issue, legacy components to your software. And I'm happy to say that Globalizer was actually built support a lot of different programming languages and a lot of customization there as well. And that's important. In this case, the person said that they're using a specific fourth generation programming language. I didn't know it off the top of my head, so I went on Wikipedia and looked it up. OpenEdge Advanced Business Language. I would say no, out of the box, we're not going to support that, but there's often a lot of customization that we can build in that will support at least components or a lot of that with Globalizer fairly quickly. The other thing is, even though you have this older language that has been used and has legacy there, even, you know, in my own reading, still a lot of the user presentation was being done with JavaScript or and specifically JSON files and more. There were lots of other file types that were being used. So in that case, yes, we can focus on those areas as well, so that we know that at least the presentation component, and remember there's always back-end stuff, is being supported for globalization. And GitLab is great. We like GitLab. Really, you know, the big ones are GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. These are, I'm probably leaving out one. TFS is sort of going by the wayside as Microsoft has taken on GitHub. But these are all Git related, anything Git related we like a lot, and our products are very much built for that. We do still support SVN, of course, but you have really good features with anything Git related. That's all it. I don't have more questions. We've stayed extra. Remember to go to lingoport.com, go to the blog page, type in Gremlins. You'll see past webinar as well as some cheat sheets on some of these issues to help you. Might help you with presentations. We'll make the recording available in a few days to a week, as well as this presentation. I want to thank you for staying. Most of you have even still stayed. Thank you, even though I'm over, and take care, and we'll see you next webinar. Oh, I forgot to show my webcam. I'll say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.